Good afternoon and welcome to this episode of Community Candor. The title of this session today is Leaving a Legacy, and we are really excited. Thank you so much to the audience for joining us. My name is Renee Kent, and I'm the Director of Special Projects here at Communities First, the host for Community Candor. And this episode is actually being done in partnership with Show Me the Money Day, which is an annual statewide initiative to connect, well, it kicks off tax season, and it's designed to connect financial education and resources to the community. So we're really excited to bring this topic to you. And please note that this is an informational session, and for individualized advice regarding your situation, we definitely recommend that you follow up with an attorney or an advisor to go over your specific situation. But I'm so glad that you're here. We've got a great guest joining us, Mr. Richard Carden from Greenleaf Trust. And so I'm going to go ahead and hand the mic over to him so he can introduce himself, tell us a little bit about his background, what he does, and the organization that he works for. And if he could also just throw in some information about what led him to this career path. We'd probably be interested in hearing that. So go ahead, Richard.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Renee, for having me. So my name is Richard Carden, and I've been in the financial services industry for a little over 7 years. And, quite frankly, I kind of stumbled into this industry. I originally went to college for education. I had a passion for teaching people and mentoring and really just giving back to the next generation. I come from a family of educators, so I felt called to teach. And when you get to college, you hear about other professions and, opportunities. And I said, hey, well, I love teaching, I love mentoring, and I love planning, and I love personal finance. So I figured, hey, this would be the best opportunity for me to get into the industry of being a financial planner. So absolutely love it. One thing I had the unique opportunity to do is just to really provide clients with peace of mind and confidence. So really helping clients, transition assets from one generation to the next, build a financial plan, and kind of fulfill their life and financial goals. So very rewarding career field. And I'm happy to be on the call today to, provide some insight and information to you all.
We're very excited to have you. And just really quickly, can you tell us a little bit about Greenleaf Trust and what kind of services that organization provides before we jump into this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So Greenleaf Trust is a comprehensive wealth management financial planning firm. So we had the opportunity to really sit down with our clients and really help them, really plan for the next generation for their finances. We also have the unique opportunity to really kind of be in a intimate relationship with our clients to where we're knowing their goals, their family, their personal and financial objectives. So it's a very unique opportunity to serve clients and also give back and really just be a part of their family.
Well, we're very excited that you're here, and we'll make sure that we share contact information as the discussion goes along. So if anybody in the audience is interested in reaching out, they'll have that information. And just a quick housekeeping item for our audience. This is live, so if there are any comments or questions, feel free to put those in the chat, and we will be reviewing those throughout. So if you have a question, we will make sure that we try to get that addressed. Also, we have a survey. It will be displayed on the screen, and it will be provided in the live chat. So when you have a chance, please fill that survey out. One, it lets us know, if the information that we're providing is useful, but also if there are other topics that you're interested in learning about, it lets us know that information as well. So please fill that survey out. And it says that you can win a prize, so even better.
Yes.
Exactly. So why are we doing this? Who are we? Communities First. We are a nonprofit community development organization, and Our mission is to build healthy, vibrant communities through economic development, affordable housing, and innovative programming. And we started this series in 2020, really as a way to connect with the community and provide information and resources um, on topics that are important to the community, as well as financial information and resources. So we're really excited today to talk about, a very important topic that affects us all. And if there's one thing that we've learned over the past 2 years, dealing with this pandemic, is that we need a plan in place. Um, and we also need to be able to pivot, right? And so we really appreciate Richard joining us, and Greenleaf Trust being part of this conversation so that we can bring this information to everybody today. So our topic is leaving a legacy. Well, what does that mean? We're talking about a long-term plan. We're talking about a will. We're talking about a power of attorney. These are important documents that provide you or can provide you and your family with peace of mind, as Richard mentioned. A last will and power of attorney are important parts of an estate plan. And when I say estate plan, please note that this is not a tool just for the wealthy. This is for everybody, right? It's something that everybody should be thinking about and be preparing, because these documents, either individually or together, we'll get into that, can provide a lot of protections for you and your family. And so let me stop talking and jump to Richard and just ask, in the very beginning, where does someone start, and when is the right time to start having these conversations and think about putting these items in place?
Yeah, really good question. So I would say, the best time to start is as soon as possible. So, like Ray was saying, it doesn't matter if you have $10 or $100,000. Like, estate planning is so important for everyone. And having an estate plan, I think, really provides your family really with peace of mind. When a loved one passes, it can be a very emotional time. There's a lot of things that you have to take care of or handle, and having the estate plan in place will really make a little bit more peace. You can kind of like breathe a little easier because you know what that person wanted to do next. So, an estate plan or having a will is pretty much a document that directs on what you should do next with your assets. So, let's say you have, a charity in mind, and you're saying, hey, anything I have left, I want to go to charity. So, having that will in place will provide your executor, which is the person that manages your estate upon your passing, to give them direction on what you want them to do next. So I would always recommend is, have that time to sit down with your family and loved ones and saying, hey, here's my belongings, and this is what I want to happen next. And I think that's a very good thing to do because, it provides your family with just that roadmap. Let's say you want your house to go to your children. Having the will in place tells your executor saying, I want my house to go to my son and my daughter. Or saying, like, hey, I had that really cool collector car that I love. I want that going to my grandchild. So that will in place will really provide your family and your executor with your roadmap and your plan of action on what you want to happen with your assets.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very important to not only let your family know what your desires are, but to put it in writing, right? Because when a family is facing loss, there's so many emotions that get involved. And so having that down on paper so that there's no misinterpretation of
Mhm.
what you wanted, that can definitely cut out a lot of frustration and anxiety
Yes.
for the family during that time.
Mhm.
And so we've heard this word before, beneficiary.
Yeah.
What does that mean, and how do you select that person?
Yeah, really good question. So a beneficiary is the person that you would like to the person that you would like to receive upon your passing. So it's really important to have a beneficiary in place. So that way, upon your passing, we know exactly who it's going to. If you don't have one in place, it's really just split, based upon how your estate is. So as I always say, it's important to figure out, who you want to give your assets to by having that estate plan and then saying, hey, here's everything that I have. I'm going to, have my grandchildren or my child or even my neighbor as my beneficiary. So that's pretty much the person that's receiving the assets upon your death. So it's always good to, assign someone, but the great part about estate planning is you can change that along the way. So let's say that you have only one grandchildren at the time, and then 10 years later you have two additional grandchildren. So you can update your estate plan to where your beneficiaries can be the three grandchildren living instead of that one at that time. So it does provide you with some flexibility if you ever need to change beneficiaries.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to ask this later, but since you brought it up, um, once you create your plan, um, how often should you revisit that?
Yeah, awesome question. So I would recommend at least every 3 to 5 years. So that gives you a chance to take a look at things as you acquire different, assets or things change hands. It's always a really good best practice to always review that at least every 5 years. Now, another I say opportunity to revisit their estate plans is when you have like any big life-changing events. So let's say you're single at the time and then 3 years from now you get married. That is a great opportunity to revisit your estate plan. Or let's say, hey, my wife and I have been living together for the last 10 years and we're expecting a child. So that is also a really good time to have an estate plan in place. And speaking on that child part, when you're having a will or an estate plan, part of that is having guardianships. So that's also a really good opportunity when you're having children to have your estate plan in place. That way you can have a guardian assigned. That way you kind of know who's taking care of your child in the event both, mom and dad pass away.
That's good information to keep in mind. And I just want to throw out a reminder to the audience. If there are any questions, feel free to put those in the chat, and we definitely will, bring those up as we go through this session. Something else to keep in mind, this is just informational. This is not directed to your personal situation. And so we always recommend that you seek professional advice from an attorney or an advisor to go through your plan. So this is just general information, but it's good information that we can use. So we appreciate it. Um, so let's dig into what documents are involved in an estate plan. What is a will? What is a power of attorney? Do you need them both? How do they um, work together? Can you walk us through some of these documents and how they work? What do you need?
Yeah. Of course, happy to do it. So there are quite a bit of documents that go into estate planning, but I think it's really important to highlight probably the most essential documents is number one, I think it's important for everyone to look into having a power of attorney. So a power of attorney is a document that allows someone to act on your behalf. And there's several different power of attorney documents, one being a healthcare power of attorney. So let's say, you're not married at the time and you get into a car accident. And if you have your sister as your power of attorney, your healthcare power of attorney, your sister can step up and make some healthcare decisions on your behalf. So it's really important to have those documents in place, particularly for a power of attorney, as in that what if. So if this happens, someone else can step up to be that power of attorney. And it's a really cool document because you can have a limited power of attorney document to say, hey, I'm going to assign my oldest child to be my power of attorney, but I only want them to be a power of attorney for financial decisions. And then so that power of attorney can only step up to maybe provide some financial step up at that time. So power of attorney is a very helpful document, and I recommend everyone having it because you just never know when you may need a power of attorney. So the second estate planning document is a will. So, we touched on it earlier, but a will is a document that really just gives you that plan of action for your estate on what to do next. So having a will is really good because it gives you the plan of action on how you want your estate to transition. Further, you can have guardianship provisions in your will. And for some people, it's really important because they may want to have certain funeral instructions. So let's say you may want your ashes to be dispersed in a sacred place for you. So having those instructions in the will can also just make sure you're taken care of upon your final death. And there's also one additional estate planning document, which is a trust. Now, trust can be used for everyone. That's not just for clients that have large assets. Trusts are very helpful to where, you want assets to be managed for the benefit of someone else. So let's say you have, money that you want to give to your grandchild, but your grandchild's only 3 years old at that time. And they won't be able to take it until they're 18 years old. So you can put money in a trust and assign a trustee, and that person is held to a fiduciary responsibility to manage it in the best interest of the client. So trust can be very beneficial depending on your certain needs. So those are probably some of the three big estate planning documents that I think, that we should highlight.
So I appreciate that. And so I recommend when somebody seeks an attorney or an advisor to go through these documents, that they talk about all of them and see, what best fits their situation,
Absolutely.
right? Because maybe it's just, it sounds like regardless of whether or not you do a will or a trust, you definitely want a power of attorney
Absolutely.
and a healthcare directive so that there's somebody there that can make some decisions on your behalf if needed.
Yes,
right?
that's a great point.
And so you've mentioned assets a couple of times. What does that mean? Is that everything? Are we just talking about a house and a car, collectibles, or can we be talking about our favored kitchenware? Like what should go in your will? Is it just subjective? Anything that is of value to you?
Yeah, really good question. Yeah, so I would put in this bucket of assets in its simplest form, like anything that has like value. So let's say, you have a car. Your car would be considered an asset for you. Your house, if you have cash in the bank or if you have investments on the side, those will all be under that asset bucket. So listing those in your will and providing direction for those assets is very, very helpful. And something to point out too, for the audience, if you have certain assets, let's say for an example, if you have a checking account and you have a couple $100s in that checking account, if you have what they call turnable on death or a beneficiary for that checking account, that gives the bank direction on, hey, upon your passing, we already know who to give the asset to. So certain assets, if you title it to have a beneficiary on those accounts wouldn't be subject to how it's being divided in the will if you have a beneficiary listed on those accounts.
Okay, so that's helpful. I think there are quite a few people who have some sort of 401k or something
Absolutely.
through their work, and so that would be something where a beneficiary most likely would be listed, right?
Yes, great point.
So in addition to checking on your will every 3 to 5 years, you should probably take a look at those accounts and make sure that the beneficiaries that you have listed still apply. Right? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really helpful too, when you're visiting that estate plan, or I mentioned, like, at least every 3 to 5 years, that it's a great point. Having, reviewing your 401k if you have one, or 403b, if you have any pensions or, investment accounts, always taking a look at those beneficiaries on that account would be very helpful in that estate planning process. So really loops everything together. Your personal assets that direct in your will, but also some of those accounts, like your checking account, your investments, or 401k, just to make sure those beneficiaries are aligned with some of your final wishes.
Absolutely. And so we've all heard stories, right? We've all seen within our own families, within our friends, neighbors. We've seen stories of what happens when someone is incapacitated, or there's a death in the family. We've seen what can happen, without having some of these protectives in place, right? And so I was hoping that you might be able to share a story about an individual or a family that you worked with to put a plan together, and what that outcome looks like. If you could just share some examples for the audience, that would be great.
Yeah, of course. So I can share two separate stories, one with a family that didn't have an estate plan in place, and one that did have an estate plan. That way we can compare the two and kind of see how that all unfolded. So had a situation with a client. There was a elderly grandmother around 94 years old, and she didn't have any children. So she just had her surviving grandchildren and great grandchildren. And she had a house, a CD account, savings account. So probably had some substantial assets. And she didn't have an estate plan in place. She was like, I'll do it someday down the road. Even at 94 years old, she was like, I'll take care of it eventually. And unfortunately, that opportunity didn't happen for her to take care of it. And, it was a very emotional time for the family, because they didn't know what to do next. They didn't know how the grandmother wanted the estate to be handled. There's a lot of tension and, friction that goes into that process. And so that's where it takes a little more complicated to really unsolve that. And that's going through probate court to kind of figuring out how do we want, the estate to be managed. And that can be a very timely process. And it's also public too, to where, if you want to keep your family business private, not having to go through some of the probate courts would be really helpful. And that process is still ongoing, but there's a lot of, they hit dead ends because they don't have an executor assigned, and they don't really have a plan in action on what to do next. So that's one side of not having an estate plan. And that process is still going out, and the decedent passed away like well over a year ago, and things haven't been figured out yet. On the other hand, there's another client that I've worked with, and the client was in their 80s, and they had a trust and they had a will in place. And in the trust, they had a house. So the owner had a house, and he put his house in trust. And that was very beneficial when the decedent passed away, because the house transitioned based on the terms of the trust. So there was no going through probate. There was no who should get the house next. The trust decided on where the house was going. And the decedent also had his will in place. So for his favorite car, his memorabilia, he was a big baseball collector, all those assets, we knew exactly where it was going to go. And so that estate got managed and settled fairly quickly compared to the one that didn't have an estate plan in place. So it provides the family with just a lot of more peace of mind, knowing that I knew where my dad wanted all of his stuff to go. And, and it just made the situation a little better because, when a family member passes away, it's very emotional. And, and the last thing you want to do is have tension with the surviving, decedent, the surviving family members on what do we do next, or I get the car, no, you get the car. So it's really helpful having those estate planning documents in place, so that way we kind of know where grandma or grandpa's final wishes are.
Those are two great examples. And so thinking about the second example, I'm definitely going to touch on the first one, but starting with the second example where everything was in place, can you talk about, where do these documents get filed? How do people know they exist? And what is that process? Once you complete a document, do people just have to search for it in your house,
Mhm.
or like, where does it exist?
Yeah, awesome question, Renee. So I'll tell you, so as a best practice, you can always file it with the court. That's a great place to know where the will is. I would advise against having your estate planning documents in a safe deposit box at a bank. Reason being is if you're the only account owner on that safe deposit box, and if you pass away, it can be a very timely process on the bank getting that safe deposit drilled open. So it's always good to have it filed, with the court. Secondly, if you have your executor in place, you can have the will with them. Some attorneys are happy to keep, the estate planning documents on file for you. But also too, it's good. Some clients have a area in their house where like, here's all my essential documents, my passport, birth certificate, will, social security card, and then telling your family, like, if something happens, check the safe, the secret stash in the house. So it's always good to have those documents in a place where they're readily accessible. And for you too, for if you ever have a will and say, hey, I need to update it, you know where to go to shred it, you know where to go to change it. That way you can get the will updated and there's not a problem with it.
That's very helpful. So thinking about the first scenario, where there wasn't a plan in place, and I believe you mentioned that it was a 94-year-old grandmother,
Yes. Yes.
right? And so, thinking about how taboo it is to talk about death. Ironically, we all know that they say, what's the saying? There are two certain things in life: taxes and death, right? So we file our taxes every year, but we don't do any planning for the latter. And so, this conversation is really to highlight the fact that this is important, and it may be an uncomfortable conversation, but spending a few minutes having this uncomfortable conversation will save, you know, years of frustration and anxiety later on. And so we definitely encourage, people to start having these conversations early and often. So
Yeah.
that, yeah, go ahead.
That's a great point. I'll tell you from a lot of the interactions I've had with clients that, have those uncomfortable conversations because you do have to think about you passing away. And it's never fun for anyone to talk about. But I'll tell you, most people feel much better after the will is written and the will is signed because it just provides them with a little relief knowing that like my family is going to have a little bit of more peace of mind by me having a will in place. So it's 9 times out of 10 for what I've worked with clients, if they do come in uncomfortable and not too excited to talk about having a will, they always leave the situation or leave that conversation feeling better after they have one. And I think it just provides so much more, a little more confidence on like for the family as well. So it's always better to have one rather than not.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm going to say this. This is my own personal comment,
Mhm.
but not talking about it does not extend your life expectancy, right?
Mhm.
That's Renee's personal
It's a good point.
advice. Um, so again, thinking about this first example, you mentioned probate.
Mhm.
Um, and I have never heard um, anyone get excited in talking about having to deal with probate court. Um, you know, it's usually a big to do. There's a lot of frustration, a lot of back and forth.
Mhm.
So let's talk about that. Let's dig into
Yeah.
that a little bit more. What is this probate court? How does it work? And what happens when you have to go through the probate court process?
Yeah. So at a very high level, it's really the court that, kind of oversees the process of a decedent's assets being transitioned. Some, I guess, benefits of it is it does help provide a clean title to, the next heir. However, it's very costly. There's fees that go into it. It's very timely. Sometimes the government doesn't move on our pace. So you may want things done faster, and sometimes the probate court isn't going to move at your pace. It's also public too. So anyone can go down and take a look at what's going on. And that may not be in your family's best interest. If you have things that are very sacred for your family and you want to keep it private and you don't want the public knowing about it, finding ways to avoid probate, I think, is really beneficial for you all. And I think it's more efficient too. So if you look at getting things done faster, so like when I mentioned earlier, I had a client that had a house and it passed through trust. So that was a very efficient process on getting his beneficiaries, access to the home rather than going through the probate process, which can take a very long time.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that. There's a cost in dealing with probate court. And so not doing this initial planning um, is not going to save you money because it's going to have to be paid later, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about um, these services in working with an attorney or an advisor. What services do they provide? How should you select someone to work with? And is it affordable?
Yeah, really, really good question. I will tell you that getting an attorney to draft a will or an estate plan is a lot more reasonable than a lot of people think it is. Of course, it varies depending on which attorney you work with and what you need in those estate planning documents, but it's advisable to always go through an attorney to have an estate plan rather than like, finding it on the internet and downloading it yourself. The wills are legal documents, and sometimes if people feel they want to challenge those documents, I mean, they can be contested in court. So having an attorney that's thoroughly going through all of your assets, knowing your estate plan, knowing what you want next, and putting that in writing is always a very good resource. And also too, like having a advisor or financial planner to someone that knows what you want to happen in the future and can really be that facilitator on making that happen, and working with your attorney to make sure, hey, I know Mr. and Mrs. Client, they have money they want to give to their grandchildren, and making sure those assets are titled to where that grandchild is the beneficiary for it, or knowing like, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client wants to have, their sports memorabilia donated to the local museum. We want to make sure that happens for them. So having, an advisor and an attorney to really go through those documents with a fine tooth comb to make sure they get done properly, I think is really essential and beneficial.
I'm glad you said that. And I'll just mention, having worked in an industry, in the financial industry, and worked with attorneys for a number of years. And you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Mhm.
Um, if you if you're in a position where you have to create your own documents, like you said, download for the
Mhm.
internet, create your own documents. Um, you've got a starting place,
Mhm.
but your goal should be to engage an attorney at some point to review those documents, because there may be some things that you're missing, um, and again, you want them to hold up in court. And so, um, even if you have to start, on your own, and then have an attorney review them later, at least you're starting, right? And I'll also say, just in working with attorneys, the more work you do, the less expensive typically your costs will be with an
Mhm.
attorney. So if you've already kind of laid everything out, in some sort of format, and then they're just coming in, doing a review, that expense is usually a lot less expensive than if they're doing everything from scratch. And you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh no, that you hit it right on the nail. So yeah, that's really important because if you're in its simplest form, attorneys may charge by the hour. So if you're sitting in the attorney's office and thinking of, hey, I got my baseball cards, I'm going to give it to my grandchild, and do I really want to give it to the grandchild? So if you're having those conversations prior and kind of having your high level roadmap on what you want done, once you meet with that attorney, it's less costly because you kind of know what you already want and they're just putting the final stamp on it, and it just makes it a little more easier and faster to deal with. So you're right, having kind of that back end work will make the process so much more easier when you're meeting with that estate planning attorney.
That's great. And just thinking about, families that are, tuning in and thinking about, putting their plan together. Um, what types of documents should they be putting together? What types of information should they be gathering, and what types of questions should they be, asking themselves before sitting down with a professional?
Yeah, so there's quite a bit of documents you may want to gather. So I think first, generally, when you meet with attorneys, they're going to want to know the big picture. So everything that you have. So let's say if you have a lake home or a beach home, they're going to want to see the titling of that house. They're going to want to see the value or estimated value of it. So any titling, or if you have certain old wills, if you have a previous will that's in place, they may want to see that as well. So it's always saying like, hey, just bring just as all the documents that you have from, maybe you have insurance contracts or marriage license or anything that you may have that could be very helpful for the attorney when they're going through and making those estate plans, because you don't want to leave anything out of your estate plan that that you have at that time. So that's, I like to call it in the legal industry, like you're partially intestate. So that means you have a will in place, but you also have things that you left outside of that will, which you want to put as much things as possible to make sure you're distributing it based on your estate plan.
Yeah, those are great points. And I just want to circle back to what you said earlier. Any births, or upcoming births, or divorces. I don't think we
Yes.
mentioned that, but certainly I think all of us have heard of a story where somebody was divorced and something wasn't changed, and so it can cause things to get sticky.
Yeah. And Renee, even things to where it's like having, part of your estate plan, like having, like if you have special needs children, that's also really good to make sure, like, hey, my child with special needs, I want to make sure things are prepared for him or her. I think that's extremely important. Or let's say even if you have like, certain pets, Pets are like children too, and you want to make sure like your pet is taken care of upon your death. So, like I said, think of anyone and everyone that really is impacted by you, and making sure like they're a part of that estate plan to ensure they're taken care of, upon your untimely passing.
And you mentioned earlier something about charity.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm just curious about that. For individuals that want to leave something to an organization that means something
Mhm.
to them, um, do they need to connect with that organization and let them know, or how does that typically work?
Yeah, so I'll tell you it I've seen it happen both ways to where charities are like, "Hey, had no idea Mr. Client left us a gift. We're so thankful for that family." It's good to, if you want to, you can let the charity know. And it's great for them to be mindful of it. Generally, when you're working with an estate planning attorney, they're going to want the charity's taxpayer ID. That way they know exactly what charitable organization it's going to. Just makes things a little bit more efficient. So generally speaking, letting the charity know is a good thing, but it's not like a requirement. Like you have to let, the American Cross know, or, your favorite church or, charitable organization know. You can kind of just have an estate plan. And then, your executor will reach out to them and say, hey, Mr. Client left you 25% of his estate. And, that's how you can leave a legacy for, the next generation and for your community.
That's great. Thank you. So we're at the end of our time. We've covered a lot of information, um, and I just want to open, or I should say, end with this last question to you, Richard.
Mhm.
Um, Out of what we've discussed, are there, one or two things that you really hope that people take away from this conversation today?
Yeah, I would want people to take away that this is for everyone. And having a financial plan and estate plan in place is for everyone. No matter if you have $1 to your name or $100 or $10,000. Everyone should have an estate plan in place because it's extremely essential for your family and your loved ones, and really leaving that legacy for the next generation. So I encourage everyone to take some time and maybe sit down with your family and your loved ones and saying, hey, this is what we're going to do because I want you all to breathe a little more easier knowing that we have an estate plan in place for you all, and things are going to be taken care of depending on how I want that in my plan. So it's open for everyone. I really encourage everyone to take a look at having an estate plan because it can be very beneficial.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And we really want to extend our appreciation and thanks to you, Richard, for joining
Yeah.
us today. What the audience doesn't know is that this came together a little bit last minute. And so we really appreciate you taking time out and sharing these golden nuggets of
Yeah.
information, which I know I found uh, very useful. I always learn something every time I do these sessions. So I appreciate that. And I really hope that, the audience gained something from this information, and ultimately will follow up and seek professional advice from an attorney or an advisor. And then, Richard, is there a website or contact information that you want to share for Greenleaf Trust?
Yeah, absolutely. So greenleaftrust.com would be our website. You can also leave my email address if anyone has any direct questions for me. rcardin@greenleaftrust.com. We're happy to provide any help there for anyone that may need it. So yeah, really enjoyed. This is a great conversation, and I'm excited for those that tuned in to really get some golden nuggets on what to do next. I think this is some great information for you all.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. So greenleaftrust.com, and Richard's email address, he shared that. we'll make sure that, well, if it doesn't show up in the chat, which I think it might, you can just rewind and you'll get his information. Just a quick note that we have a survey, and so we really encourage you to complete that survey. Let us know if this information was helpful, if there are other topics that you're interested in, and we will be selecting a name from those that complete the survey for a prize. So there's that. We appreciate you joining us, and save the date and time for our next session on Monday, where we're going to be talking about new ways to save. Thank you, and everybody have a great rest of your afternoon.